Hi everyone, Ashley here and welcome to another video on the Penguin Palace Dance YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be showing how to make this really fun slimline card with a really adorable track and field like scene with all of these cute animals doing different track and field activities, and then of course the cheerleaders cheering them on throughout the way. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'm starting by building the background, and for this card I wanted a simple ink blended background. This doesn't include any extraneous die cutting, I'm not using any border dies, I'm not using any patterned paper, it's all just built on ink blending. And how I achieved the scene through ink blending is by just ink blending the greens along the bottom to make it look like grass, and the blues along the top to make it look like sky. So this way I could have my scene just from ink blending without really needing to add any different dyes or different levels of paper or anything. So it's sort of like a one-layer background, so to speak. So as you can see, I blended out the green along the bottom to make it look like grass, and I used two different shades of green just to kind of give it some extra texture. And that's Lucky Clover as the darker green and Shabby Shudders as the lighter green. And I'm doing the same thing for the sky with the blue. So I'm using Salty Ocean as the darker blue and Tumbled Glass as the lighter blue, and just blending them together to kind of add a nice ombre effect. I'm then splattering the whole background with water just to add some extra texture and a little bit of an extra variation in the colors. And I like to do this a lot on my cards. If you've watched any of my other videos, you'll know that this is a technique that I employ almost every time I create an ink blended background or scene. I just really like the way that it adds to the texture of the colors and makes it a little bit less flat. So I just splattered it with water and then dabbed it off with a paper towel so that it lifts off the color and creates that leftover splatter look. Next, I'm doing the same thing but with a sparkle glitter liquid. So this is actually Liquid Stardust by Lampine, and it's just a liquid that has lots of glitter in it. And I'm just putting a few dabs onto an acrylic block and swiping it off onto the card with a paintbrush to create another layer of the splatter effect. So you can see there when I turn the card in the light, you see the glittery effect from that Liquid Stardust, which is really beautiful. Next, I'm using my Mini Misty, and this is a stamp positioning tool, to stamp out all of the images that I'm going to be using on this card. And I used a combination of images from the Happy Track and Field Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 stamp sets for this card. These stamp sets work really well together because they both have animals and critters and little cheerleaders that are doing track and field, different kinds of activities. So they kind of are themed similarly and can definitely be used in combination like very, very easily. So that was something fun to do for this card. I'm stamping them out in black ink, and this is just a Copic friendly ink by Lampine, and onto some Neenah Solar White paper. And this is a Copic friendly paper. It's a bright white paper that really holds alcohol ink coloring well, and I'm going to be using Copic markers to color in these images. I stamped them out a couple times just to get a nice crisp black image, and now I'm going to go ahead and color them in with my Copic markers. I'm using my typical Copic coloring technique for this, where I start with a dark shade and then blend it out with a light shade. And then I often go back in with the dark shade just to add an extra layer of shadow. It kind of adds almost like a third layer because it's even darker than the first time you use the dark shade, because that's now being blended out with light. So it's a good way of getting almost like a 3-layer dimension of color when you're only really using 2 colors, and it works really well for small spaces where you don't necessarily have the space to add in all 3 different shades. So I'm going to go ahead and speed up the video here and play some music while I finish this coloring. So if you like to watch coloring, feel free to watch and enjoy as I finish coloring all of these images. If you don't like to watch coloring, then of course feel free to skip ahead in the video and watch the rest of this card come together. I'll see you in a bit. Okay, so off camera I went ahead and die cut all of those images that had been colored with the coordinating dies that come with the stamp sets, which are super helpful to just cut them out really quickly. And now it's time to put the card together. So as you can see, I cut out a piece of fun foam to be slightly smaller than the card front, and I'm using some big double-sided tape to adhere to each side of the fun foam, and then adhere that fun foam down into the card base and then the card front onto the fun foam. And this just gives the card front that extra layer of dimension that kind of adds a little bit of interest to a card that I really like. And the double-sided tape is a really good way of adhering fun foam onto paper, because I find that sometimes liquid glue can kind of squish around on the fun foam and not necessarily adhere perfectly well. So the double-sided tape really adheres the fun foam to anything perfectly. So I'm putting the card front down into the card base, which by the way is a slimline size card just made out of plain white cardstock. And when I say slimline size, I use 9 inches by 4 inches, so that's 9 inches long by 4 inches wide. And that's because this size will fit into a business size envelope, which is super convenient. So I went ahead and stamped out the sentiment that comes in that stamp set, and that's "I'll always be your cheerleader," which I think is a super cute and encouraging sentiment. I just stamped it out onto some white paper and cut it down into a strip so that I'll just adhere that strip onto the card front as well. So now it's time to put all of these little cute critters and images together to make the scene. And as usual, again, if you've watched any of my other videos, you know that one technique I like to do when I'm building scenes like this with cute little images is to use a variety of liquid glue, or a combination of liquid glue and foam squares, to adhere the different images down onto the card front. And that's because some will get dimension and some won't, and it adds just a nice touch of variety to your card and a little bit of dimensional interest, so to say. I'm also placing down a bunch of the images using my craft tweezers, which are a super useful tool to have while crafting because they allow you to just place images down in a very, very precise manner so that your finger isn't really getting in the way of how you're putting the image down, and you can really see where you're placing it before you really stick it down into the card. So the final touch on this card is just to add a few little gems. I chose some multicolored gems, which will kind of match with the colors I chose to color in the different images. And I'm just kind of placing them in a random assortment along the card front using some liquid glue to just stick them down. And at that point, the card is complete. So yeah, you can see when I turn it in the light, you get that beautiful shimmer and shine from that liquid Stardust splatter. And these images just make the cutest little slimline scene with all of the different activities going on with the critters. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you want to see more cards like this, head over to my Instagram account or the Penguin Palace Instagram account. Both are linked down below in the description box. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye!